Who's ruining the triangle plane? It is me, Squishface, the guy that has the Mirage 2000, like a lot of players. Now, I have found myself in a position that I really didn't intend to be in the fact that I am trying to explain whether or not War Thunder flight models are realistic or not, and what they do, how they do them, and how much they deviate from their real life counterparts. Because I started off with the SU-27 video. I got a lot of good responses from that, and this is something that I've just found like rather interesting for myself because up until now, nobody has really made an honest attempt to explain the differences between War Thunder flight models and their real life counterparts, and gone to the degree that I have apparently. I don't know why this is kind of like very low hanging fruit, and I don't think I'm necessarily the right guy to present this because honestly, like me getting drunk and then trying to explain math and diagrams and pretend that I'm a real fighter pilot is probably not the best option. Probably not the best messenger. Someone can do this better in the future, but until that happens, I am sorry, guys. You are stuck with me. So to start things out, we're going to explain basically the basic working, well, the basic workings of an energy management diagram. This is the thing that John Boyd did that was his actual contribution to aviation history, is making a graph program to basically visualize what planes do and how they do those things. Now, I think the best way to explain this is to just kind of start from top to bottom and go by kind of like our little map key up here. If we look at the top and our red brown lines, we have the title of the graph, which is turn performance at 15,000 feet, 4,572 meters. It just tells you the altitude that these measurements were calculated. Now, if we move to the left, box, this tells you the airplane configuration. Basically, the graph pertains to a Mirage 2000 at 15,000 feet with 50% fuel, full cannon ammo, and two R550 Magic 2 missiles. Basically, your short range air to air interception, whatever configuration. This is a pretty common configuration for NATO energy management diagrams. It just means that we can take this, we can look at the left side and go into the game and load up the plane the same way, and then make a sort of apples to apples comparison. Now, if we move further down our little key here, we got the baby blue. We got the whole entire flight envelope, which is basically the way that I characterize this. This is your gorilla pole flight envelope if the G limit and the AOA limitations were correct. If they programmed the Flickus instrumentation system the way that it was supposed to be, you would never really go outside of these numbers. Now, because this is War Thunder and planes don't necessarily have the same flight limitations as they do IRL, i.e., you can pull more Gs than you could in real life, and you can also pull higher AOA. I have kind of notated that in purple. These purple marks are not really a specific thing. They're more or less just a visualization. So when you have the 14.5G F104 at 50% fuel or whatever it is, you would have like a giant purple section to add to the EM diagram. This is just kind of a very simple visualization. It's not, don't take the purple marks as any kind of math. But what this means in practical terms is that planes in War Thunder will typically have exaggerated performance at very high speeds, and will also have exaggerated performance at lower speeds, just due to the fact that they can exceed the G limitations and they can also exceed AOA limitations. Now we are going to jump to the bottom of our little key here, and starting from the bottom, we have the radius. Now, if you look at the graph, I have 1500 circled, and if you follow this vertical line down, this is basically going to tell you at what speeds, how many Gs, and all of that good stuff that you have to pull in order to get a 1,500 foot radius with the Mirage 2000, at least in real life, not within the game. Moving a little bit further up, we have the baby blue. We have the 7.0 mark circled. This is just 7.0 Gs because turn rate and Gs they're basically the same thing. If you have a 7G turn at a set speed, it's a 7G turn at a set speed. You're going to have the same turn rate. Obviously, the turn rate is on the left side. The Mach numbers and speeds are on the bottom. That's going to be the same for all of these EM diagrams. And then as we move up, we get to the thing that War Thunder kind of sort of cares about. We go to the instant turn rate. This is basically the highest turn rate that the plane will ever reach when you gorilla pull it, at least in real life. In War Thunder, it's a little bit different. I'm going to go into that a little bit further into this video. But we got all of the circles out. Now we're going to jump again. We're going to jump to the middle. We're going to jump to the black line. The black line is labeled with a 0. This is your sustained turn rate line. More or less, if you match these mock numbers, turn rates, etc., you should not gain or lose speed in real life. Okay, so we're going to bump one line up from the 0 line, and we're going to bump up to the minus 200 line. This minus 200 line, this is a specific excess power line. I'm calling everything in red is bleed rate lines. These are speeds and rates where if you pull this hard, you will either A, lose speed, or B, have to trade altitude to maintain that speed one way or the other. Basically, the only thing these numbers really tell you is how hard you can pull and how much speed you're going to lose for that pull and how your energy state is going to degrade. So that's all the lines are. That's the only use that they are for us right now. We're not going to get too complicated here. And then we're going to jump back down to our black line. We're going to jump down to the green lines. The green lines, on the other hand, are gain lines. These are basically when you relax the turn, when you turn less than the sustained, it means that your plane will start to speed up again. So the way to visualize this is like dogfights are not static, sustained rate fights. There are points where you pull hard and you lose speed, and there are points where you relax your turn to regain your speed back. So you can kind of characterize planes based on some of their bleed rate characteristics. So for instance, the Su-27, you would characterize it as a plane that has a reasonable sustained turn, a pretty decent instantaneous turn, like its peak would be very high, but it also has very high bleed rates and arguably probably very low gain rates as well. On the other hand, if you're going to make the comparison to the F-15, everything would remain kind of more or less the same, or at least the way that's mapped in War Thunder. But the distinguishing factor for the F-15 is, yes, it has a high bleed rate. It has a slightly probably worse instantaneous turn rate if you only look at it a single point on the graph like the very peak. But because the bleed rate is a little bit lower, its effective instantaneous turn rate ends up being a little bit higher. But the big distinguishing characteristic would be it's got really good recovery rates. So what happens with the F-15 is, yeah, you get slow, but you go straight or you neg-G tap for a couple seconds, and then you're already going 5 to 600 kph, or you're going all the way back up to like 800 kph. Where if you try to do the same thing in the Su-27, because you have lower recovery rates, potentially, I haven't graphed all this out, but if you have lower recovery rates, you don't get up to speed as fast. You have to go straight for longer, and that means that overall, with the way the game works, it's kind of pretty logical that the F-15 would win most dogfights against the Su-27. So why did I waste 8 minutes of your time talking about the Mirage 2000 EM diagram when this is War Thunder? Well, the reason I'm interested in this kind of thing is I want to be able to compare the in-game flight models versus their real-life counterparts and determine whether or not they're realistic or not, because there's a lot of people that say that there are, there's a lot of people that say that they aren't, and a lot of the times people get really fixated on really just verifying a couple of data points without kind of looking at the whole entire picture. And the EM diagram really does give us a pretty accurate representation of what the planes should be able to do, and it gives us something to directly compare it. And because WTRTI, War Thunder Real-Time Interface, has a specific excess power measurement function, it means that we can actually go into the game, do some turns, do some recording, and generate some data points and put them on the graph, and then we can compare them. What this means is we can really go out and determine whether or not planes are losing speed as fast as they should, or if they're regaining them as fast as they should, and we can kind of articulate in what ways they are overperforming and what ways they're underperforming, so that we're no longer just saying that a plane is artificially buffed, and that's the end of the discussion. We can actually go in and understand the meat, potatoes, nuts, and bolts of what is going on within War Thunder's own flight simulation. And basically what this looks like is loading the plane up with the correct fuel load, the correct missile load, and then going to the correct altitude, getting to speed, and then doing max performance turns while losing as little altitude as possible, and then plotting those data points on a graph and then looking at the specific excess power of those data points. And that's basically what I did with the Mirage 2000 and the F-16A and the grip, and is basically go up to altitude, pull hard, pause the replay video, and look at how much this plane is bleeding, because the specific excess power function in WTRTI will either give you a number in meters per second, which you will have to convert meters to feet per second to make a direct comparison on the graph, or you can do it in feet per minute, and then you divide feet per minute by 60 because there's 60 seconds in a minute, and there you go. You have the specific excess power for that turn rate at that specific point in time. And that means that we can reasonably check not only the bleed rates of the planes, not only the instantaneous turn rate and the sustained turn rates, we can also check the gain rate. So we can have a much fuller picture on what is actually going on. And we are going to get to the preliminary results. This is the Mirage 2000. I have put some dots, I've put some orange marks, I put a bunch of stuff on the graph, a little bit of notations just to kind of like help me keep track and kind of talk through what I observed going on. Now, I can't stress this enough. Don't take this as like gospel truth. You guys should go out and repeat this test before they change the Mirage 2000 flight model, just to understand what's going on, understand the difficulties of maintaining like the perfectly level 4,572 meters turn or whatever it is. So basically, starting at the top, we have our orange triangle here, and this is a part of the flight envelope that you just don't have access to. At least in damping. Like you can pull full stick back at 4,572. It is not going to exceed around that 18.5 degree per second mark, or that 19 degree per second mark, because moving below that triangle, we have our little blue dots. And these little blue dots are basically the turn rates that I observed at the Mach numbers while doing basically a monkey pull. And because we have these numbers, and because we have the SCP values on the chart, we can kind of compare the two. And up at the top, I have the SCP numbers written down that correspond to the blue dots. Basically, if we start on the furthest right blue dot, we have a Mach 0.8 dot, 18.5 degrees per second, and a negative SCP value of 882. Looking at the chart, you can see that the minus 800 line is below that, so it's definitely more than minus 800. It is believable. It is relatively close. This first dot seems pretty reasonable. We move to the second dot. The second dot circled in orange. I circled it just to not obscure it in our little triangle diagram here. Same kind of story. It's kind of close. Mach 0.7, 19 degrees per second. It's more above the minus 800 line, so you would expect the bleed rate to increase, but in fact, what I observed is the bleed rate actually decreased a little bit. But it's probably within like that margin of error where maybe the plane was going down a little bit. So it's believable, but in order to, if we took it as gospel truth to correct it, you would have to increase the bleed rate by 100 feet per second here. Moving on to the Mach 0.6 dot. That's going to be a little dot next to like the little elbow shape in the triangle. We have 18.5 degrees. It's solidly above the minus 800 line still. And now we're seeing the numbers start to diverge. We're starting to see the bleed rates diverge pretty significantly, because at Mach 0.6, it should be bleeding more than negative 800 feet per second. But in reality, in Warthunder, it's bleeding minus 650 feet per second. So the correction factor to make that correct would be add 250 feet per second to the bleed rate, or adjust the curve so that it bleeds faster. Same story for Mach 0.5 and Mach 0.4. Basically, you can look at the dot. You see that our next dot is above the minus 600 line, and in game we have a bleed value of negative 452 feet per second. So we are basically the Mirage 2000. The slower you go, the more divergent the bleed rate is, and the more that it overperforms in kind of like that low speed flight. And that's also why it's going to get it's allegedly getting changed. We'll see what the differences are, but just kind of looking at top to bottom, on the high end, we don't have the maximum initial turn rate. We only have 19 degrees per second in game versus 23 in real life. But overall, the bleed rate itself for kind of like this gorilla pull is overall a lot lower than it probably should be. We'll see how it changes. We'll come back to it and look at it again. Now we're going to move even further down though, because we talked about initial turn, and we talked about bleed rate. I'm not going to talk about sustained turn rate because there's enough videos out there that prove that the Mirage 2000 is underperforming in sustained turn rates by about 2 to 3 degrees per second, I want to say, at the correct altitudes. And that's the part that's getting changed, and the low speed is also getting tweaked. We'll see how that works out, but hopefully the next flight model will be more accurate. But now we go down here because we said, oh, it's overperforming, and underperforming. Let's talk about gain rates now. So the way that I tested out gain rate on the Mirage 2000 is more or less kind of the same idea, but instead I looked and I tried to maintain an 8 degree per second turn rate. Basically looking at WTRTI and like adjusting my turn to maintain 8 degrees per second. Then I plotted some dots just to see like how far they are off. So basically what has happened is I'm not graphing the rate itself because it was flat. That's the bottom part. And looking at our green numbers, at Mach 0.5, we had a gain rate of plus 100 feet per second. And if we look at Mach 0.5, we look at the dot. Below that dot, we look at the line at 8, we would expect to be gaining probably around 150 feet per second, maybe 175. Like, we're getting pretty close to that 200 line. So then we bump up and go up to Mach 0.6, and the in-game value is positive 148 feet per second. That was what I was getting. On the graph, if we look at it, we're solidly below that 200 line, which means we should be between anywhere between 2 and 400 positive value. So you can call it, I called it like 225, 2 something. The correction factor is on the right side of the screen. But basically, as we move on, as we look at this green line, the gain rate for the Mirage 2000, if I did everything correctly, the gain rates are also underperforming. So you have a plane that's really weird. You have a flight model that doesn't make any fucking sense. Basically, you don't have your initial turn rate at the altitude. You don't lose speed quick enough, but you also don't regain it the rate that you should. Anyways, that's the video. I'm going to let you guys look at this. I'm going to let people comment on this. And if you really want to nerd out about it, like the channel, subscribe to it, because guess what? If you guys think that this format is good, we're going to do the gripping at some point. That's going to be a lot of fun.